Welcome back on stage, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. Up next is the session with Hans, John, Jeff, and Sue about the future of remote work and how it pertains to staffing. I will hand over to Hans to start the session. And if you have questions, please drop them into the chat and Hans will make sure to answer them throughout the session or at the end. Thank you so much, everyone, and enjoy the session. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Jan. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for attending today's summit. I'm joined here by John, Sue, Jeff, and I will begin with asking them to provide a little background information, context before we dive into the subject. John, why don't you kick it off?
Sure. John Healy, I'm representing the World Employment Confederation, where I'm a vice president of the organization, also chair their blockchain task force. Many of you may remember me from my time at Kelly Services. I spent 28 years at Kelly and continue to represent Kelly at the board, but have kind of stepped out of the industry for a short period of time and have some new things ahead.
Sue?
Yes, hello everyone. My name is Sue Bhatia and I'm the founder and chairwoman of Rose International. We're a talent acquisition firm, been in business 26 years. And we work with 150 clients around the country through 20 locations. Been in business long time. Thank you.
Thanks. Jeff, your turn.
Hello, everybody. Great to be here with you all. My name is Jeff Wald. I have founded several technology companies. The most recent is a company called WorkMarket. Raised about $100 million from SoftBank, Union Square Ventures, and a few others. We sold the company 3 years ago to ADP, the world's largest human capital management software company. I have also written a book on the future of work, which I'll show you, even though it's going to be here backwards, called The End of Jobs, Rise of On-Demand Workers and Agile Corporations. We were lucky enough to become the #1 book in all of Amazon's HR categories for a hot minute, because Amazon rechecks that every hour. So we were there, and then we lost it pretty quickly too. But very excited for the conversation.
Thanks, Jeff. Appreciate it. My name is Hans Bucco, and I've been involved also for about 20 years. Serial entrepreneur like Jeff and others, venture-backed, last company called eWork. So it'll be interesting once I talk about 2eWork. European publicly traded company, kind of get blamed for some of the VMS developments. And back in the day when, if anyone remembers, it was Elance, Guru, and eWork trying to create the I think it's named nowadays the human cloud in the beginnings of the .com era. Anyway, so we're very excited to get together. I've been working in the last couple of months, getting further and further into this thing called remote work, which I, for lack of a better term, call eWork as well. And before I wanted to jump in with some questions from our panel, there's a very quick thing I wanted to do here, which I'm going to take a, let's see if this works. I think it should work. Let's see if we can do this. I think everyone still gets up there. Yeah, everyone can still be seeing. So what I wanted to do is basically just give a magnitude sense for what's going on with the future of work here. I'll just do some screens. So very briefly, see if this is moving. I think everybody's heard that Salesforce bought Slack for $27.7 billion. So obviously that is a big market statement on what's going on with collaborative remote work. It's a huge development. And some of the interesting elements is the #1 fastest COVID-driven change of all the things that COVID did to the marketplace and to companies. By far the most significant was going remote. Projects that were on plans to get done in 454 days was done on average in the survey of CEOs that McKinsey did in 10 days. That's how fast people can move when they have to. The other thing too is now with vaccines and kind of the light at the end of the tunnel, there's a lot of thought that maybe we all go back or go back somewhat. But this other trend, basically, and some other statements from PwC and Gartner suggest that this particular trend is here to stay in a pretty large manner. So I think we all believe strongly that somehow all this remote and work from anywhere, things we'd like to call e-working, is going to be part of what we're doing. Upwork's future, Workforce Pulse, if we dive into a little bit closer to the staffing angle, 70% managers who see the value in remote work are engaging independent professionals. I think the staffing industry and the relationship with independent professionals is an interesting one, because obviously independents are out there really marketing themselves, selling themselves, delivering. They're almost little mini companies and really are on the forefront. So it's an important understanding that managers and people that are holding the purse strings on a lot of these projects are becoming more and more engaged with individuals directly. And then finally, some statistics here about 2025, 36 million Americans will be remote. What the number is exactly, who knows? But globally, this is all happening all at the same time, all around the world. It's a very significant development. So what about remote work and productivity? CEOs, essentially managers, looking at the issues, are basically not very confident. They know it's generally gotten more productive, but the numbers suggest that there's a lot of anxiety around exactly what's going on and how remote work is working and how it's going to change and improve. So before, we had local physical dependencies and the fact that a matter of simple diagram were anywhere, anytime production. And we're all doing it through collaborative platforms. I think everybody here will fully attest that one of these brands or one of these shields is something that they regularly interface with. And the number of connections and interactions, work interactions, with about 1.2 billion people working digitally from some form or another, the number of interactions is just astronomically growing. So the amount of data that's being derived from all these interactions through this digital layer is growing. And as we know, the organization of communications, information, and plan results work is very, very important to how we take advantage of this digital layer. So thanks for that. Bottom line is there's work demand, a lot of people wanting to work, especially with the remote work style now starting to become more and more a part of the way we work. Here we are today, even on a platform. And there's a lot of talent supply that wants to deliver that work, wants to be productive, wants to get the most out of their education. And here we are, obviously, in a world where staffing is in between. So that hopefully sets up the conversation about remote work, and especially relative to staffing. So go around the horn. John, what have you seen in terms of remote work, and it's what insights, what novelty, what things didn't you expect is now happening with companies, staffing companies relative to remote work?
I think, Hans, and again, thanks everyone for being out there in the audience, and do challenge us along the way. This is a session for you guys, so keep us honest, keep pushing us as we go through this. But I would say that the part that struck me the most is the resilience of this industry. You saw organizations that were heavily focused in maybe the hospitality industry that was completely shut down, suddenly find a way to adapt and help out in different sectors where there was growth. And so I think every time I've seen a crisis in this industry or affect the way people connect with jobs, what's always excited me about this industry is how quickly people have adapted. And I think we saw that once again, and that's probably the most important thing of all that I saw.
Sue, as an operator, leader of a staffing company, what can you say?
Thanks, Hans. I'm happy to be here today. I wanted to just say that all businesses have been impacted by remote work during the pandemic, and the staffing industry is no exception. Back in March, we quickly adopted the work from home model for all our 20 offices, and within a matter of days, we were all up and running seamlessly. We're still recruiting and delivering top talent at the same speed or perhaps even faster than we were before the pandemic began. Overall, I feel like staffing companies are mostly impacted due to the client portfolio they hold. And the good news is, like one of your charts mentioned, that you can hire temporary workers across the country, anywhere they live. It doesn't matter. The geographic constraints have been removed. You showed a nice graphic on that. And the contingent workforce hasn't really slowed down. We've noticed because of remote work, it's only slowed down for industries that have been impacted strongly, like airlines, entertainment, hospitality. Both of you mentioned that. The fluctuation in contingent workforce and its demand, I feel like, will continue because as the economic recovery happens, we will see that fluctuate in the next year or two. We're dealing with a much bigger talent pool, and hiring managers are much more open to hiring temporary workers from any location. Now, this leads to sustainable job growth by distributing our economic footprint more evenly throughout the country. There's only so many new jobs that cities like New York and San Francisco can absorb and sustain without the cost of living going through the roof. So, workers can live anywhere, cost of living is down, and it's a more even distribution of economic wealth around the country. That being said, we're noticing that there are challenges with remote work. One of them being the different time zones, because people are working, from far away. The time zones need to be settled with. And second is, how do you measure productivity? And thirdly, team assimilation is important, to have these remote workers feel they belong to a certain team without having met any member ever in the team. So I think the staffing companies need to work closely with their clients to overcome these challenges. So we're seeing all of this.
Yeah, excellent points. Yeah, I think a lot of us have talked about remote work, but we were remote working with people that we knew before this began. I think it starts to get much more interesting when we initiate that engagement, that relationship entirely online. And that's for most of us who don't have online dating experience. But we'll see how that works. Jeff, how about you? I mean, what are you seeing out there? I mean, obviously you have a lot of touch points as a platform provider, have interfaced with a lot of staffing and workforce companies. What generally was a real surprise in terms of how this remote work and staffing?
And did we switch to online dating, or is that the subject? Should I comment on that?
No.
Just because I have experience with that does
right?
not mean that I necessarily am better at this.
Good. Now we're better positioned to answer
Fair.
this than most. So
well, Hans,
flowing in the chat.
Here's where I would focus my thoughts on this. First is, understanding what remote work means. And the reason I wrote this book was to put forward a framework to say we need to look at history, we need to look at data, we need to think about how companies actually engage workers. And when we think about remote work, we should start with some definitions first and foremost, right? I like the data that you had, and that was an amazing presentation and really kind of highlighted the topic here. For me, when remote work is brought up, it is people that spend more than 50% of their time not going to the office. And that has important implications from a tax nexus standpoint. It has important implications from a infrastructure standpoint. Do I need to allocate square footage to you, or can I hot desk you or hotel desk you? And so the standard definition that I've seen was more than 50%, which I think that your data was talking more about people with flexible work arrangements, which from a purely technical standpoint, if you're in the office 3 days a week, but aren't 2, you have a flexible work arrangement. You are not a remote worker. They're very, very different. And remote work was 1.5% of the US workforce. In 2010, it grew to 3% of the US workforce. And most of us that study labor statistics and history would not have made any prediction more than maybe it gets to 4% over the next 10 years, because remote work had always been a pull function. It was always the employee asking to do it, and it was the employer mostly saying no. And the reason that we had a lot of kind of leveling off was 2 big impediments. One was mindset. And we all know the manager that says, look, I know all the studies say that remote workers are happier, they're healthier, they're more engaged, they have higher retention rates, they cost us less, they cost the worker less. I know all that, but I think productivity equals presence. I think magic happens when people are in the office together. And so that mindset was a big impediment to remote work's continued growth. The second thing was that remote work doesn't work unless you have the infrastructure and the policies and the procedures to make it work. Infrastructure meaning, look, it's one thing to say you can work remotely. It's another to make sure you can access all of the company's systems outside of the company's 4 walls. Because if you can't do it, remote work is not really feasible at scale. And so both of those things had to change in March of 2020. And that led to, at the height of the pandemic, 40% of the US workforce working remotely. And it's super important to remember, 42% is the max limit in the United States. Because clearly people in manufacturing and extraction industries and transportation and logistics and a host of other things can't work from home. 42% is the max limit. That is the highest of any country in the OECD, which is the one there where this data comes from. And most other countries are in kind of the 36, 37% range. And so we've seen tremendous growth. And then it is part of what we call the tech acceleration, this acceleration of digital work, of digital payments, of digital commerce. But there will be a snapback. And we don't know what extent that snapback is going to occur. You put up some great stats about what managers want, about what workers want. And so we will find out over the coming months, hopefully, God willing, as we get into a post-pandemic world, how much remote work is going to sustain and what that will really mean for companies, for workers, and for staffing firms.
But Jeff, Hans, if you don't mind, I want to just kind of jump in there.
Bring it.
Yeah. You think that there's a point in there of how maybe what we began with as the pandemic hit was about jobs being moved remote and all the work needed to be done. But what we're learning now inside organizations, and this is our client organizations, and it's what's forcing the staffing companies to adapt, is that it's now tasks and activities that people are figuring out. So it's no longer the whole job that we look at. We're looking at which tasks and activities can be done. So that's where your whole hybrid workforce is coming from and what's happening in there. But that's opening up all new models for how talent is delivered and what type of work activity is being done and where they're being based. So I think the point for me is we're still in the early stage here. We've gone through a rapid transformation at a pace no one was anticipating. And now it's starting to settle in because we've gotten comfortable and companies are deciding, hey, wait a minute, I like the idea of not having to hold all of this capital, real estate, all that cost that's there. And they're starting to look at that. And that's starting to open some opportunities for their partners of all kinds. So the outsourcing models that have been maturing for so long are a great place for staffing companies to be looking and thinking about what's ahead.
So John, I am in violent agreement with all that. In terms of the disaggregation of work, the atomization of work into tasks, and that allowing for the breaking up of different things. And not only has the Zooms and this wonderful Hopin and a host of other things enabled that, so has Basecamp and Jira and all kinds of project management software. They're at the root of being able to disaggregate these workflows. The question I would have, and the thing that I would counsel, is to be careful about making too much assumptions based on something that you guys all touched on earlier. There's so much data and it's all happening so quickly that I would be careful about making assumptions until we see the snapback and we see it a quarter or two. And then we'll get a better sense as to, will people start to release some of that capital that's tied up in office space? Will workers want to be fully remote, or 50% or more, or are they going to want those flexible work arrangements and they're just going to want more ability to be more flexible? I don't know yet. I would bet, and I will put numbers on this, and you can hold me to these numbers, that we went from 1.5 to 3%. We're up at 40%. I bet we're going to end up at about 8%, categorized as fully remote. And keep in mind that 8% is out of 42%. So that is to say nearly 20% of the workers that can be remote will be. But people with flexible work arrangements are 32 to 33% of the labor force. That's where we're really going to end up. And that opens up huge amounts of talent pools and a host of different things for staffing companies and for their partners.
Yeah, I think that's all very valid. I don't know about you all, but I remember, if I look back over a career, just in the last even 20 years, that almost every year progressively, all the tools, all the capabilities, the expectations, work efforts. I mean, how many of us were working from anywhere, really? I mean, forget home, the technology, it was just, you could almost chart it, right? I mean, we could all probably sit there and say, okay, how much of the work was it like wherever I needed to be, on my phone, wherever it needed to be? And I would be hard pressed to see anyone who say, oh, it went backwards, or it just kept growing. It kept growing. And then boom, this event had happened. And we realized that we had to completely rely on the skills that we had been building, and the platforms and the techniques and the expectations of coworkers. And now all of a sudden becomes a daily event, right? All the companies that say, especially digital ones, e-working types, knowledge workers. Most of them were like, okay, yeah, the pandemic made it more of what I was sort of already doing before. So I get this, and I get some of the benefits that come with it and some of the problems that come with it. But the bottom line is, this is, as I referred to, the pandemic was really a massive tailwind on what was already happening in digitizing work, right? I think
and just take to Jeff's numbers, though, as one point. The staffing industry represents about 2 to 3% of the U.S. workforce. And that's pretty consistent as you go around the globe, really not even extending beyond 7 or 8%. We like to talk about how the gig workforce is radically changing that and altering. Not so much yet. So when we talk about this, we also have to break down not just what percent of work can be done remotely, but if we're talking about within the staffing industry, we have to truly understand the difference between many firms that are specialized in heavy blue collar labor. They're seeing 0% remote other than their own staff. And then you see other firms that are in the IT space that are 100% remote on everything, and they've built a completely remote model. So we also have to just be a little careful in typecasting everything as being the same within the staffing industry.
And another point, Jeff, you're talking about percentages and a hybrid model. The challenge with a hybrid model is the costs remain the same. So you don't really realize the cost savings. You still have to have your offices open, and employees have the choice of coming 1 or 2 days a week. So the cost benefit is not there. And yet, the team dynamics, like you're saying, that 8% is what you're expecting it to be. Well, we'll see. It's definitely something to allow that to unfold and watch. But interesting points. Thank you.
So I think maybe, when I had that diagram of the staffing industry as an intermediary, we know the demand side. I mean, I think all of us have seen that more skills, more talent, digitization of everything requires more and more of that, especially if we focus clearly in the IT-centric, digital creative-centric areas here. So perhaps a little bit less on that side of the equation. And we know now that the expectation, given this experience, is that they're going to also want a lot of it to be done remotely, a lot more flexibly, over standardized platforms that they use for their own workers and so on. But let's look at the other side of the equation. I think it's a little bit more of a challenge. It's already a challenge, but even more of a challenge, perhaps, or maybe not, maybe an opportunity to find the talent. So, Sue, what are you seeing? What are you seeing in that workforce, recruitment world? Obviously, you operate a staffing company. You need people to deliver value. So what does that look like?
So in terms of working with candidates through the hiring process, our team quickly adapted to having all digital contact in this new normal. Hiring managers are relying mostly on virtual interviews because they still want to see who they're hiring. Finding, curating, and cultivating talent is a lot easier because we have a larger talent pool. I think all people on the panel mentioned the larger talent pool advantage. And there is a wider acceptance of remote workers. Diversity is important at this moment because of this larger talent pool. We're finding that a lot of companies are taking this opportunity to hire a diverse workforce. The fact that it's all remote and all digital, it's all the more important to have the job description be very specific and clear. Being precise and clear from the beginning improves the communication throughout the hiring process. Video interviews are definitely here to stay, and we've been using them a long time. Since candidates have more choices for jobs, for example, somebody sitting in Ohio can be on assignment for a Silicon Valley company. It's important for clients to have a very strong, well-defined brand to represent their values, and that's how they attract the temporary workers or full-time employees. So the clear and defined identity for their brand is extremely important, is what we're finding. And then we have cost savings. Working from home saves costs associated with an office, and we see a lot of companies, including ourselves, using those savings towards technology and digital transformation. We're also seeing higher productivity and lower turnover. One of your slides mentioned that. And the corporate culture has to be managed online. For example, how do you cultivate talent? That's something that we have to think about in our own companies so we can address this, the team dynamics, the advantages of working in a team or learning from coworkers. All of this needs to be addressed. We're physically distanced, but still we have social connections, and they're just online now. Staying connected internally and with our employees or externally with our clients and suppliers is, I find, more and more important than ever for a productive corporate culture and positive relationships in this business. Yeah.
Very interesting. Yeah, we got about 6 minutes or so. Time's flying when we're having fun. I'm feeling that we can go on for quite a long time. It's very topical, very interesting. A lot of things happening. So what I want to do is just briefly shift, I think, to one final sort of question related to, especially a lot of staffing people at the summit. What are the insights in terms of possibly the models, the business activity? It's been traditionally a hourly based accounting. Here's the skills. Everybody works this much time. Let's do some accounting, figure out what to charge and receive and so on. Now with groups, teams forming, maybe more services being purchased. What are you seeing or imagine will be the future trend on the pressures on the staffing models that you see? And John, you might have a good experience on this.
Yeah, I think staffing firms need to be making a choice of whether they want to kind of sustain their role in the existing model or they're ready to really shake things up. And I think as you look at it right now, it's easy to recognize a migration towards more outsourcing or outcome-based activity. If I can't bring you in for 10 hours and know that you're sitting at your chair for 10 hours or for 40 hours in a week or whatever it is, that it's harder for me to measure that. And so companies are being forced to figure out outcomes. Well, they're also being forced to do that for their full-time employees. So if we start thinking about what the enterprise is doing, they're starting to learn how to bifurcate the work, how to measure the work in a different way. And so they're going to look for their partners, whether they're outsourcing partners or their time and materials partners, to also do the same and start factoring that in. But the other part that I think is really going to flow in here is related to the aspect of trust. And Sue, you hit on some of these pieces here of what the worker is expecting, and the social reform that we're experiencing throughout the world right now is indicating that the worker is expecting a much greater level of trust in the relationship with anyone that they're working with, as a consumer or as an employee. And so you're going to start seeing things like blockchain networks starting to form that start deepening the responsibility and the control that the worker has in things. We're even seeing it, I think it was just last week, Microsoft, Cisco, and Salesforce.com came together to offer a digital wallet for tracking the vaccines as they get pushed out. Immediately, governments are asking, what else can we put in that wallet? So our worker information is going to go in there. So you're going to start distributing more aspects of that, which is going to make it much easier for the individual to go from one org to the next, to the next, to the next. And so the role of that intermediary in making that easy, regardless of where location is going to really stand out. So I'll pause there.
Right. Yeah, and again, I think that that disintermediation, let's say, of individuals, of possessing or controlling, or suggests a more proactive role on the staffing companies to kind of market. Sue mentioned, the company's brands, staffing companies having their own brands. We talked about possibly, adding assessments, adding education, finding relationships that really make it a longer lasting partnership. That's always been a challenge, for staffing, but I think it'll continue to be so. And then, from a younger generation, I know, having kids, teenagers, there's a kind of hipness too associated with, integrating technology into the way they operate. And not related to online dating or anything, Jeff, but just in general, the way everyone's using phones and doing cool stuff. I know, having a teenage 18-year-old boy, that he's very plugged in, right? Like I think a lot of young generations people are, and they're not going to have any patience for relating and associating with people who aren't similarly connected. So Any other further thoughts? I think I got Jan letting me know that we're on our way
So
out.
I'll offer this on our way out.
Yeah,
You know,
please.
as people look at how technologies get adopted over history and the impact they have, Bill Gates had a great quote, which is people overestimate technology's impact in a 2-year time frame and they underestimate technology's impact in a 10-year time frame. He was talking about a consumer interaction and what tech can do. It takes companies a long time to adopt technologies. And when they finally do, it moves very, very slowly and then very quickly. And so the quicker you can adopt these different technologies, these different processes, the more you'll be ahead of the curve. And if you don't do it, the more you're going to be behind the curve very quickly. That's one thing to remember. The other is that you can't paint these things with a broad brush. Every industry is different, every job function is different, and it really comes down to the supply and demand balance in those different subsectors by geography, by skill set. And in some places, the employee has a lot of power, and they tend to, when they do that, historically want to work in a contingent context. But most times the employer has power and they will determine how things are done. So be mindful of the history, be mindful of how companies engage technology, and be mindful of how specific you need to be when talking about the future of work.
Right. Well, Jan signaled me we must be doing something right there. He signaled me that we got a few more minutes. So just to kind of go on that a little bit more, which is a little bit more tangible. What has been your favorite, let's say, collaborative or tool? I mean, tech. I mean that this really brought.
And again, we're staying off of online dating here, John. So don't say Tinder. That's out.
That's
Mural.
Correct. Yeah.
I would go to Mural as a phenomenal collaboration tool that I've seen design thinking sessions just really come to life for groups that had never experienced design thinking and were entirely new to collaboration. So very user-friendly, very easy to use, very effective, some great templates that are being built out by some of the project management companies out there.
Great. Sue, any thoughts on surely even as the CEO of the company, you must be collaborating on technology with all of your staff. So what kind of things have you really been
we have our own technology platform that we built. It's homegrown and it's state of the art. We try to stay ahead of all the trends that are that we can see on the horizon. That being said, I think this panel would be incomplete if we didn't mention two very important items. That are, one of them, we talked a little bit about employee well-being, and that's something staffing companies have to take charge of because there are burnout signs. 33% of employees are complaining of burnout because people are working longer hours. So there's something there where I feel like well-being is being very seriously looked at. And with remote work, it's very well connected. And the other thing is in December, there were 156,000 jobs lost, and all of them were women. Would you have believed that? And that's because there's just so much demand on young mothers and women at home that have to juggle a lot of responsibilities. So they're leaving the workforce. And that's something that's major. It's coming from the remote work norm. So hopefully over the next few years, we have to work towards bringing the women back to work. I know it's not a technology answer, but I really wanted to bring those in because it's very important and it's related to remote work. So,
it's interesting. This endeavor, this 2E work endeavor that I've been putting together, and we've been doing demonstrations, and I've spoken on several panels and done some webinar work here. That ends up being this work-life balance issue is really high. Everybody's talking about increased productivity during the pandemic. And I jokingly say, well, perhaps people were so nervous about losing their jobs, they actually outperformed their colleagues and everyone just worked harder because they're kind of, for the wrong reasons, they're kind of fearful, right? That, of course, as we all know, working too hard leads to a serious potential problem with burnout. And then by far the other issue was this work-life balance, especially with the fact that we're all kind of part-time teachers now, in addition to everything else, at the same time as doing everything else. But the interesting thing was in the endeavor that I'm pursuing here with collecting e-working data analytics is that it's hard to get the answers, or to at least feel you're going in the right direction towards the answers without data collection, right? And so all these transactions, I refer to them as work transactions. I showed this sort of little diagram. Everything that you do that's not a purchasing transaction, an e-commerce transaction, but it's a work-related transaction, if assessed and looked at, can start to look for trends that will help answer the question that we all have on the top of our minds. How many Zoom calls are too many, is it time now to make sure that it's okay for my kids to spend more time online, because I need to spend some time working online. So yeah, there's a lot of issues that are popping up. I think you're right. Women have seen that issue. I think the mental health associated with wellness and environment, right? I mean, people crowded in closets, or helping another company that's doing a lot with sensors and IoT to make sure that the work environments have the right kind of just physical environment. All these things come into the consideration. For
good opportunity to
absolutely,
tap into
well.
some of
So
the data
agree
that's out there on this too. Microsoft's done a really good job in tracking some information, just showing if you have the opportunity to meet someone first and then collaborate with them, the amount of stress in your body is dramatically lower. So I think that those are things that you're going to see. That type of data, say, it's going to reshape how offices are structured as you go forward, that they will be collaboration centers or innovation hubs. You'll hear it labeled as, of bringing people together to do something so that they can operate as a remote team more effectively later on. And again, I think because they do that, it's going to create much more opportunity for the staffing industry, because it's not about owning, controlling, and retaining people. It's about getting access to the right talent for the right project. So I see really, really rosy times ahead for the staffing industry as a result of this.
Well, I like your choice of words, John.
Perfectly placed. Okay, so I'm trying to look for some questions here.
Well,
outside
I'll
of any other further comments.
2 points in. One, to John's point, and a point that has been made by everybody. Look, humans are social animals, and there is a reason why when you look at remote work, the vast majority of remote workers, again, remembering our definition of remote work, live within a commutable distance of the office. Mm-hmm. And so people think, oh, well, if we move to remote work, that means everything gets outsourced overseas. No, it doesn't, because people want to be in the office. Maybe it's only once a month, but they want to catch up with their colleagues. They want to build that trust. They want to be engaged in the company culture. But Hans, back to the question you had asked about technology, the biggest challenge I think workers are going to face as we think about this fourth industrial revolution, robots and AI, is retraining, is upskilling. And the kinds of things that, if we look historically, society has done very poorly. We don't support the workers whose jobs, whose functions, whose industries have started to get automated away. And we do that to our collective peril. We ignore them to our collective peril. So when I think about things that really excite me from a technology standpoint, there are amazing tools being generated right now on training, massively compressing the time, massively compressing the cost of training. There are amazing things going on in the VR space where you put on that Oculus headset and you are, playing a game, and a month later you are job ready. You are job ready to go onto the line at Lockheed Martin. I'm thinking of a specific company that I am involved with, full disclosure, called Transfer VR, where Lockheed Martin, you put that thing on and a month later you are on the factory floor with 90% retention of staying in that job. These are phenomenal statistics as to how quickly they can train people up.
Well, and let's think about the fact that we're inadvertently training an entire generation to absorb education that way. I've got kids here at home that every day are learning a lot faster about these tools that allow them to learn, to kind of get assessed, because let's face it, we got to kind of qualify the education. So there are all these things that I think are being injected into the reskilling. I was involved in robotics automation as my first phase of my career. And that was a very big issue, obviously, as so many automation robots, physical automation robots, were being placed in factories. And there was never enough support. And the companies genuinely also didn't communicate very clearly that they were fully interested in maintaining and engaging with employees who had served very well and had a lot of other information and knowledge that was pertinent to their continuation of work. But there wasn't a strategy, there wasn't really a good deliverable plan for how to get those skills in very dedicated workforce that wanted to maintain and continue and grow with the company as well. So I think it's a very
big expectation
I've seen that
of the worker.
Go ahead.
And if I go out and invest in the reskilling, because candidly, most of the reskilling is at the expense of the worker today, that when they go out and do that, that they have the opportunity to use those skills. And if you're not going to give that to them, they are going to find some way to get it. If they're going to make the investment in themselves, they are going to find a way to do something. So if your organization is committed to reskilling and helping people, you've got to be equally committed to helping people find that opportunity. And that's maybe a challenge I put out to those in the staffing industry sometimes, and even the measures that we put out and how we rate and manage staffing companies is we say, I expect everyone to stay on their assignment forever. And maybe if they learn something in, after 3 months or 6 months and they go out and pick something else up, we've got to be backfilling their role and helping them find their next opportunity, not degrading them for moving on when they need to do something to better their lives.
And that is super important where you have that supply and demand imbalance. And look, there's a reason Adecco bought General Assembly, right? Like they wanted to train up a group of people into an area where there was a supply and demand imbalance. And there's a reason they bought Vettery, right? They want to get into this platform business. And so you start thinking about training and platforms and what kind of things staffing firms can do to differentiate themselves, separate themselves. Look, everyone can't do what Adecco does. And Adecco shouldn't do a number of things that Adecco does. But there are a lot of very clear trends based on what they're doing that other people can action on in different ways.
Yeah, but if you're going to call Adecco out on the bad, I'm going to call him out on the good. In that you've got Elaine DeHaze sitting at the World Economic Forum at his expense and Adecco's expense, representing our entire industry. So being here representing the entire staffing industry through the World Employment Confederation, I got to call Adecco out and Ronstadt out and the companies who have made very deep investments to focus on the brand reputation of our industry. And it's something we need to all come together more frequently on.
And as a practical matter, I was calling them out for innovation and moving things forward. Nothing but love for Adecco.
Yeah, definitely seeing the future. And Sue, I mean, let's get you in on this as well as the true staffing executive representative. How much of that has kind of infiltrated that intermediary role we talked about? I mean, how important is it? I mean, it's we've always heard it's important, and we kind of see some of it going on. But now with all the automated platforms and all the abilities, and like I mentioned, future generations coming that are going to expect to be well progressed in terms of the skill set. Do you think that's a big part or a bigger part, growing part of a staffing company is making sure that they're fully appreciating what's needed and going out and cultivating that?
Yeah, absolutely. Our value add has not changed. Most contingent workers before the pandemic were at the client site. Now they're remote. So they were anyways not sitting physically with the staffing company, right? So the real value I feel for staffing companies, the robust hiring, recruiting engine, and the variety of opportunities to work on different assignments, to reskill and upskill themselves. So that remains the same, and risk mitigation for the clients. And I feel like the responsibility for upskilling has to stay with an individual. And yes, there are a lot of tools out there that are inexpensive. You mentioned some today, all of you. And then there are many inexpensive, even free tools that people can use. And I feel like staffing industry gives people that opportunity to learn new skills rather rapidly, because they don't stay with the domain knowledge of whether it's just healthcare or banking and financial sector. They move from assignments, and in doing that, they are picking up new skills. So that is, I believe, a natural value add from the staffing sector, and an attraction for a lot of these workers when they're deciding to become an FTE or a contingent worker. right? And then there are a lot of new job roles that keep coming up. Like recently, we've heard a lot of demand for epidemiologists, contact tracers, climate change responders, occupancy specialists, and even something, a brand new title is head of remote work, right? So these are titles that are coming up. There's a demand. And so staffing companies have to navigate through all these new titles and figure out how to supply the demand that is out there. And a lot of that is just bringing the whole package together, working with the candidate, working with the client, if there's any skilling needed, upskilling needed to be able to offer that. So it's important. I think the intermediary role is critical for us. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, we had mentioned this before about even confidence, right? I mean, this is all new to the companies and the managers. There's a big area of confusion around, how do I manage remotely even better? And to have confidence around a partner, a longstanding partner that can collaborate with them and give them the confidence, I think is really important. I think that is an important aspect of being an intermediary in the staffing company who has some good, solid, long-term experience on how workers need to be treated and progressed, right? So, all right. So I'm waiting here. I think, Jan, we're coming to a close. I want to thank John, Sue, Jeff. You guys were outstanding. Hopefully, we provided some insight. Nobody can predict the future, but we try to at least establish some platform for trying and. Enjoy your remote working, since I don't think it's going away anytime soon. And when you combine it with all the other fun technology stuff with AI and ML and all these other things, hopefully it won't feel as weird as
online. Had to bring it back there, didn't you, Hans?
All right, I got to get to my next online date.
Why not?
Okay.
You guys are best. Thank you.
Yeah. See ya.